David Kerridge gets the prize for trekking the farthest distance to be with us for this exploration. He blazed a trail from Aberdeen, Scotland to Cincinnati, Ohio, and he braved the territory known as international air travel. Thankfully, he arrived, not too chaotically and in some semblance of order. And David's job in the order of things today is to assure us that chaos can be managed and controlled if we understand that it obeys simple laws. David Kerridge, statistician and assistant director of research for the British Deming Association, talking to us about management in the face of chaos. Welcome, David Kerridge.
Haha, it works. You never know, do you? Right. I must remind you, well, I needn't remind you, I'm going to remind you, sorry, that management is concerned with prediction, and chaos is concerned with the unpredictable, so I've got a sticky wicket for a start. Sorry, you don't understand things like that over here. I beg your pardon. You can work it out, But I'd like, just before I plunge into the depths that I've created for myself, this trap, to just clear up something that often causes difficulty. Barbara Lawton has been talking about models. And you often get arguments, you usually get up, when you find sensible people arguing, they're nearly always arguing because they're talking about different things. I'm talking about models too, but I'm not talking about the same kind of model. And if you thought I was, it would cause a lot of confusion. Some models are essentially conceptual. They are an essential part of our thinking because they are creative. They cause us to jump out of the ruts that we create. Conceptual models. There are other models which are essentially axiomatic. They're all dealing with assumptions. What are we assuming? Okay, they're fine. And with those, you can perform logical analysis. And there's another form of model which is predictive. And another name for it is a scientific law, which is what I'm going to call it in order to be provocative. Because I'm going to talk about scientific laws in the context of chaos where there apparently aren't any. But if there weren't any, management would be impossible. So let's take it as an established, observed fact that people do actually manage. Therefore, there must be laws. Therefore, we better find out what they are. Okay? So, and those are not in any sense contradictory ways of using models. They're entirely complementary, and I'd like to represent them that way. You see, we're so used to one-dimensional thinking, and one-dimensional thinking is a disaster. Isn't that the problem with people's approach to the system of profound knowledge? They'll say, a psychology problem, at last, I can now be a psychologist. And it's not a psychology problem, as Mike Tvati said. It is an everything problem. Everything we get has to have concepts, or we can't think about it. It has to have logic somewhere, so that we can test we can use what reason we have, and we have to have prediction, because without prediction we cannot test. Without prediction there is no knowledge. We wouldn't get the knowledge without the concept. We just wouldn't get there. So I'm not contradicting what has been said before, but I'm trying to isolate what can be predicted. Right, well now, that's just the commercial. Now down to work. And our first thing to do is a little bit of applied chaos management. If you turn to your 3-ring binder, you will find somewhere near the end, page 1, visible order, invisible chaos. This is a written typescript. And I want you to undo your binder, take it out, and move it back until it sits before the first diagram, which is this one. It belongs there. Now, It belongs immediately before that diagram, which is also in your 3-ring binder. All right? Are you winning? No, you're absolutely chaotic now. Wonderful. Now, was that predictable? I bet it was. And as a further exercise in applied chaos, I'm going to start the lecture here, which is in the middle of the notes. I'm going to start the lecture here with this diagram, which is in the middle of the notes. There is a reason for this. There's logic. And the reason is that the way that you learn is different from the way you should review the subject. And that's why you start C.I. Lewis at chapter 8. Right? The way in which you go into the subject is not the same. The notes are put together in the correct order for when you go home and you read it over in the quiet winter evenings when there's nothing exciting on television. They're the correct order for that. They're not the correct order for reaching the subject. Now, where does this? I'm starting with some practical observations. The practical observation was in fact made by Nida Bakaitis, referring to Marshall Industries, where she said, I didn't actually plant her in the system. She actually said something about order incorrectly applied creating chaos. That is a difficult concept for many people to understand, that order can ever create chaos. Well, it can. How does it manage it? This thing has got a lot of little black boxes. They're grey boxes, but never mind. Let's look inside the black boxes. And the clear lines of authority are supposed to be there in these hierarchical systems to make sure everybody has the same aim. Right? Now we look inside the little boxes. We've made the invisible become visible. And what do we see? Now, why has that happened? This is the aim of the overall organization as set by the chief executive. And that's what's happened because he tells his people, and of course the telling is not just in words, but in symbols and in gestures and in flogging and in pay for performance. The information is passed down. Rule 4 of the funnel is operating because while the information is only permitted to be passed by these channels, it is, according to the rule 4 of the funnel, the variability, the chaos will increase. Correct? Obvious, isn't it? Now, why does the insistence on this hierarchy create more chaos than you might have without it? And that's not entirely true. Without it, you might have utter chaos. But because it is one way of achieving some order, but rigid insistence that you are not allowed to know anything except through these channels makes it worse, because you're always going to get this rule 4 operating. It creates more chaos. And the more layers there are, the more chaos there will be. If you have a 20-layer organization, just imagine what's happening. Nobody knows what's going on. And as Nida also mentioned, it works in that direction too. This is information system. The more layers, and do you know, they seem to be talking about re-engineering these days, as if it was a new invention. One of the things that Dr. Deming told the Japanese in the 50s was that they should reduce the number of levels of management. Interesting thing for a statistician to say, wasn't it? But it's based on basic statistical principles on the understanding of variation. If that's the way you pass information, you will get chaos. So there is visible order, rigidly insisted on, inappropriately insisted on, actually increasing the chaos. Whereas if you allowed people to talk to each other and align their aims across the organization that way, these things wouldn't get so badly out. Now, it is predictable that this will happen. That's the point. There is a prediction. There is a concealed law of nature somewhere, and we're going to burrow and burrow until we get somewhere near where those laws of nature are. Here's another one. Visible order. Instant communication, right? It does produce order. You can have all the information in the world. I sit at my desk, and I'm connected to internet, and I can call up all the library catalogues just about in any university in the world. Well, not all in the world, but all the ones connected to internet, more than I can possibly want to know about. I can get all sorts of documents online. I can do all sorts of things like that. And that's the way the world is. Now, you'd think information, the more information, the better. I'm not so sure. Look at this. That's meant to represent the result of instant communication. An information explosion that nobody knows how to cope with. It's like the poor person who finds on their desk a report that thick. Piles and piles of figures. What do you do with it? You don't read any of it. You can't possibly read that. So you're actually worse off than if you weren't told anything. Then you might have asked. Information is not knowledge. Right? Information is not knowledge. If it were knowledge that was conveyed, you'd be all right. And you can do that. If you take this information, make sure it is useful for prediction, that it is turned into charts which do convey context as well. See, one of the great problems, and this Paul Batalden said, by these systems you take information out of context. And you can't turn it into knowledge without the context. So we have got information overload by relying on a mechanical system to produce order. It doesn't work. It is predictable that chaos will result, and it does. It results, in fact, because there are limitations on the transmission of information, which are well known by psychologists, by engineers. There's only a certain amount that can be pushed through, a certain rate at which information can be transmitted through any system, whatever, fixed by laws of nature, which we will come to in a minute, which are, in fact, incorrectly stated, but still true. Most of them are. Most of them are. And now, this was something else that we've heard about many occasions. ISO 9000. What a wonderful way to create order. Of course, it creates visible order, correct? Because it can only deal with visible order. Chaos is like an iceberg, 90% is under the water, invisible. Because on the whole, the visible chaos you deal with. If you're building a car and you notice the door keeps falling off, you do something about that. But the invisible chaos in an organization, which is often in the management systems, you cannot deal with by the normal means. The only way you can deal with the invisible is by means of theory. You have to look at the visible in order to test your theory, but your management of the invisible relies on theory alone and can never do anything else. That's why we need theory. That's why we need predictive statements about organizations and about this kind of chaos. And if there were, I know it is hard to believe that chaos can be predictable in any sense whatever, but if that were not possible, management would not exist. And nothing would, there would be absolute nothing. So therefore we've got to find it, and we've got to apply it. It's there somewhere, and we're going to work at it. And I'm going to make some suggestions today, having shown you these purely practical. I would guess that every one of you have seen these sort of things. Behind the scenes, under those rigid procedures, you've got that going on. Right? Now why? Because usually, if a rigid procedure is imposed without knowledge of the process, that is inappropriate rigidity, you can't run the thing that way. And therefore, half the time you're trying to do it, obey the procedure, half the time you're trying to get the thing done. And you've got a non-constancy introduced. You've actually increased chaos by introducing rigid procedures. Now, of course, if those procedures were set as in Japan by the workers themselves, continually revised, as Kosaka Yoshida was telling us, they're continually revised, updated, and they are a way of coordinating the workers and reducing chaos, fine. But if they're imposed without reference to the nature of the process, they create chaos in spite of their apparent outward conformity. So it's predictable. The wonderful thing about theory is that it works. Isn't that marvelous? But now I want to go back and try to understand how we can formulate these things. Gosh, time's going faster than that. Oh well. What's a bit of chaos here and there? My first assertion is that chaos is a law of nature, grossly overlooked. You see, when you go to school, you start to learn about science, you learn about all these wonderful laws of nature with the planets moving like clockwork and so on like that. But that's a very, very simple system. The real systems are chaotic. And there are a number of concepts which had to be developed and which lie behind what I'm going to talk about. And this is the only difficult thing in the talk. I'm going to ask you to put aside any previous knowledge you have of these concepts, because I think it will actually be a hindrance to you. You may not have heard of them before. Right. Those of you who've not heard them before will, in the discussion groups, be able to help those who have. Because if you have only met a concept before in a different context, you'll be unable to shake yourself out of that context. You see, if you were to take an idea like money and to explain it to somebody, an Aboriginal who had never heard of money, he'd find it a very strange concept, but he would be able to think about it in a clear way that you can't, because you know all about money. Right, so here is one concept, entropy. Don't worry about what it means too much, but it's a fundamental law of physics, which we can draw on, right? It is normally stated in a rather restricted way, but the concept is that disorder, in some sense, which has to be very carefully stated, keeps on increasing. That's why we get chaos in organizations. The entropy is increasing. You plant a garden with beautiful flowers in it, and weeds start growing. Now, a weed is only a plant in the wrong place. It's the law of nature that things don't stay in the right place. By the time I've finished, my overheads will be in a state of total chaos. I know that from experience. This is a predictive statement. Okay? That's all we need to know. Forget the context in which you learnt about it, please. The next concept, you needn't forget quite so much here, statistical control, but the point I want to make is that random variation is a myth. And unfortunately, not many people have quite gathered that yet. Random variation is approximately achieved under rare circumstances, but never with a physical system. You may remember, having attended the red bead experiment, hearing, this is a physical randomizer, right? Physical randomizing device. It does not produce random variation. No physical randomizing device ever does, quite. It sometimes gets near it. So we're dealing with a fundamental shift of thinking there, which most people have not yet caught up with. Another idea, information theory, which is a technical matter for electrical engineers, is it? Well, it's not going to be by the time we've finished. So remove that, please, wash it out. All it says that's important to us now as a concept is that the amount of information that you can take in, either through your brain or through a radio set, or through a transmission system, or over internet, the amount of information that can be transmitted per unit time has a physical limit. It is a genuine physical limit. Try to push faster than that, the information is simply degraded, and you don't get more information. People keep on trying to push more information to any system that it can cope with. Here's another concept which used to annoy me bitterly. The mathematicians have made chaos legal. And I thought it had always happened. And it's rather like catastrophe theory, which used to be very popular at one time, gone off a bit now. Bridges used to fall down before catastrophe theory was invented. And chaos, I knew chaos was there, but the point was, mathematicians couldn't think about it. And I have found it extraordinarily useful. It creates the awareness in people's minds that an purely orderly system will produce something that you cannot in practice predict. That has not a random pattern, but a pattern beyond understanding and following. And that's all we need to know about it. So don't try to know too much. Please, all experts on chaos theory, there are books on every one of these topics I've mentioned. Please either keep quiet or leave the room or something. Laws of chaos. This is the key. I'm stating them as laws to make it absolutely plain on which basis I'm stating them. A law is a predictive statement which has not yet been proved wrong. It is no more than that. Usually at some point it will be proved wrong under some circumstances, and then you've got a new law. You thought Newton's law of gravity was true, did you? Well, it's still true that if I drop that, it almost certainly goes downwards. It hasn't gone that far wrong, but you stand too near a black hole, and it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Right? It is still a law of nature. It's approximate, actually. Now we've got general relativity. Never mind, it's still a law of nature, properly understood. It's a predictive statement that has now been put in a better context. I'm going to do something now which is really sticking my neck out, nothing like living dangerously. I'm going to restate what Shewhart said in his book in the form of laws of nature. He stated 3 postulates. But I'm trying to state, what did he really say about the world we live in that is... Now, this is where you want to help. It is your job to try and prove everything I say wrong, because this is the only way that science makes any progress at all. Every statement probably has to be qualified. I don't know. But the first law is the output of every process is chaotic, that is, rather than random. He discovered the non-existence of random variables, which was rather a shock to the mathematical statisticians of the time, which is why they have ignored what he said totally. It was so beyond their conceptual thinking that they really couldn't face it. And I believe that's the whole blockage to the use of SPC in a proper, as Shewhart really intended it to be. The output of the second law, and this is, in other words, something that you rely on every day you use a control chart. That's what I mean by a law. It is something that you can rely on because it predicts the result of action. You can, if you remove special causes, I haven't defined them yet, but never mind, you will reduce the variability, and interestingly enough, you can remove them from any subsystem. Removing special causes is always benign. That's a very, very powerful statement about the world. Maybe it isn't true. Please tell me if you can find an exception. But that is apparently implied by not by the direct statement that Shewhart made. He very cautiously said, this is postulate number 2 or something. I am putting it right out in the open so it can be shot at, which is what a scientific law must be done. It's the only way. So don't blame me when it's wrong. All you can blame me is if I haven't stated it right, or I haven't correctly made it open to challenge. A scientific law not open to challenge is useless. You take the statement, some people are fairly tall, you know. What use is that? It doesn't predict a thing, because you can't prove it wrong. Okay. There's a third law. For each process, there is a random variable which corresponds to the output of the process in a perfect state of statistical control, which you never actually reach. So it's a limit to what can be achieved with that process. Now, that's a predictive statement about the world because you can try it. You can take a process. I mean, this was Shewhart, a great discovery he made. You take away the special causes, you get something getting near to a random variable, never quite random, because you'd need an infinite series to test it. Meaningless to say it's random, but it gets nearer there, and it then begins to behave more like the classical random variation of statistics. Testable? Yes. Is it right? I don't know. That's not my job, is it? The job is all of us. Science is the product of a community, never... Okay, is it right? I don't know. I've stated the law, now you have a good... you're going to have fun. You're going to be able to disprove everything. You should try, because there is no progress without this concerted attack on every law. It's what scientists are for. Science isn't about being right, it's about making mistakes in a highly systematic and disciplined manner. Okay, let's apply this theory. You must have applications. I've lost complete track of time, never mind. Yeah. Here is an application which I call the Shewhart machine, and maybe slightly tongue-in-cheek, I don't know, but there is in theoretical computing a thing called the Turing machine, which can compute absolutely anything. And it's used for purely theoretical purposes. you can compute anything with a Turing machine. Some of you may well have heard of it. Right. I'm asserting that with a Shewhart machine, you can make any decision process whatever. The difference in the way you use it is very important. What you put in are these connections here, which represent information flows. There is the Shewhart machine being used to tamper. And it's used for tampering if all you do is, by the way, if you can't read the diagrams, well, they're fairly big, but if you can't read the diagrams, it's all in the book. All that happens is that the inputs come in here, they go through the process, you measure the outputs, you feed the information from the outputs back onto your controls through a decision maker. It doesn't use the store of knowledge you have about the process, that's ignored. You don't monitor the inputs, you don't care what's coming in, all you do is to react to outputs, that's tampering, right? It's a specialized, highly popular activity. Actually, one reason may be because the manager here who's doing this job is so overloaded with information he hasn't got time to do anything but react. So maybe the tampering is created by some of the other laws. Increasing chaos, what's more. You can analyze this in terms of the laws I've stated and see where all the chaos comes from. But in fact, I've analyzed 6 different ways in which chaos is increased by this mechanism. Found that? Okay. And just to show you a different use, the Shewhart machine is a universal machine. All you do is to change the information flows. If you are wanting to make long-term improvement in a process, you monitor the inputs, you monitor the processes, everything is measured, examined. You use everything you've got. This one, you overcome the limit, the information limit, the rate at which information can be processed by the fact that you can take as long as you like. Improvement is long-term. I'm talking about long-term permanent improvement in a process. Because you are taking it over the long term, you've overcome the difficulty of the information theory limit. Therefore, you can improve your process. Okay, but you do that by continually improving your decision-making system in the light of the knowledge that you build up as a store about your process. That's permanent because that store changes. Any system that doesn't change that store of knowledge is not a way to improve the process. It's just a way to get by. But getting by is your normal way of running any process to some extent. This is one that we don't normally talk about, but this, I believe, explains why common cause variation exists. So, here we are. I'm living dangerously again, you know, but it's fun, isn't it? I'm just waiting to be shot down afterwards. Your inputs are monitored, but you're a rational decision maker. You react to changes in input. That's not tampering. It is not tampering to say, because my raw material that's coming in, the paper pulp that I'm using is changed in its consistency, I will change the settings on my machine to adjust to it. You use your existing store of knowledge about how that raw material change affects your process to adjust the controls and get a better output. You do not look at the outputs in this mode, except to notice there's a separate loop if a special cause has arisen, and then you go into a special cause handling mode, which I haven't drawn. You can go away and draw all the other modes of operating this machine, and my claim is that all management can be represented by sufficient number of chained and parallel and whatnot machines of this kind. Now we know what we mean by changing the system. This is the point, because this is an analytic model. We change the system if we change our store of knowledge, or if we change the inputs. Now, most people don't think of the inputs as part of the process, but I assure you that you can reduce variation, reduce common cause variation by reducing the inputs. Therefore, they must be included as part of the machine if we're to analyze it at all. And that's one of the interesting things. You know the model which we've all seen, production viewed as a system. The supplier is part of the process. And one reason why people have not developed this kind of thinking is because they've never put the supplier or the customer inside the process. Incredible. I know it's only a diagram, but this model is predictive. This one predicts that used this way, you can actually reduce variation you can actually reduce variation to less than it would be without this loop, whereas the tempering one must always increase it. That's a predictive statement. Check it. You go out into the world, you can see, does it work? If it works, if you cannot find any exception to it, it's a law of nature. It's something you can use. You see, there are these things, they are more qualitative statements than quantitative statements. You can use them. All your management is based on usable predictions, predictions you've tested. Now, why are we doing all this? What is our aim? Let's take a break from all this intellectual activity and think what on earth we're doing this for. I am not here to prove that the Deming philosophy works. Newton was not there to prove that apples fall off trees, right? He was there to find out in what way they fall off trees and how it's connected with other things. I'm making connections which were not perhaps quite so apparent before. That is all. I'm not attempting to prove it works because the facts, we started with the facts. We started with observations which have been made over and over again that certain things, applying the 14 points reduces the chaos in the system, right? Why do they do? We are now beginning to get not a quantitative statement, prediction, but a qualitative prediction which is always available with chaos, which means that chaos in the physical world does have limitations. It is not utter chaos. If you want utter chaos, read Alice Through the Looking Glass, which is the chaos textbook, the first chaos textbook. Charles Dodgson, you know, was a mathematical logician, and he put a lot of his analysis into children's books. For example, he first proved that thing that somebody else borrowed and called an incompleteness, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, Gödel's incompleteness theorem. He published it as a children's story of what the tortoise said to Achilles. He got there first, but I suppose he had difficulty with referees. Anyway, in the Alice Through the Looking Glass world, you cannot predict anything at all. And if management were like that, there'd be no business to be in. So therefore, we know it's not like that. Somewhere, maybe I have not yet located the right laws, but there are laws. Otherwise, there would be no management. Management is prediction, right? And prediction is therefore possible if management's possible. If management's impossible, let's all go home. I'm now going to apply just this same thinking to another, and I assert, waiting to be shot down, this is a predictive model. And this is a model based on an enormous amount of work that's been done on the study of infection, which doesn't sound as if it's got much to do with management. But let us just go back to one of our laws of nature, that variation, Tribus law, the chaos has increased. I told you it would. You know, I'm good at prediction. The one that says that chaos spreads and multiplies. Okay. Tribus law. It multiplies. A key word. Infection multiplies. The more infected people there are, the more infected people there will be. Now, what that implies for a system is that there will be more because there are more, and there will be less because there are less. You don't know which it'll, something starts it going up or down, but there will then be more because there are more. There are more cases of AIDS because there are more cases of AIDS. This is a remarkable and profound statement. It sounds stupid, doesn't it? But why do you think that copying examples without theory is a waste of time? Why is a business successful? It's probably successful because it's successful. Because success has an infectious property. When you're doing well, everybody's confident. Everything's going well, so therefore everything goes well. When the confidence goes down, it gets worse because it's getting worse. It happens to national economies, and do you know, there has been a cycle in the world economy lasting approximately 50 years, and it has gone on for 300 years, up, down, up, down. That's the nature of an infectious system. Nobody knows why it happens yet, but I suspect whatever it is due to, it's because we have an infectious process at work. Now, all this infectious theory goes back to Ross, who discovered how malaria was transmitted way back some long time ago, and he produced predictions from it which said, if you do what I tell you, malaria will die out. And they said, oh yeah, that's ridiculous, you know. You can't kill all those mosquitoes. But he said, if you, as a result of his model, if you dip an oily rag in every puddle near a house, malaria will die out. And they wouldn't try it. He then found an island somewhere and eliminated malaria from it. And they said, oh, yes, must have been coincidence. Because they couldn't understand his mathematical model. They believed him when he said there's that funny wriggly thing down the microscope, because they could go and look at that. But this mathematical model was a bit too difficult. Right? Now, I believe that transformation is an infectious process. It depends on creativity. Creativity is infectious. Why do you think we have a meeting like this? It's because creativity and scientific thinking is an infectious process. The more I think, the more you think, the more we shall all think. Why do you think there's been an explosion of scientific knowledge over the last few centuries? It's because there are more scientists, and they're infectious. And they keep on spreading, and the ideas spread faster than the people. It's more important. Actually, we have a number of, one of the great problems with these infectious systems is they reach a natural limit. You needn't worry about AIDS. It won't kill more than a quarter of the population. No disease, no infectious disease in the whole history of mankind has killed more than a quarter of the population. Don't know why, there's some natural limit. I'll make that prediction. Fairly safe, I won't be here to see the end of it, so. His predictive theory, if you do, there have been circumstances where much more of the population has been killed, but that's only when there have been several diseases operating at once, as happened when the conquistadores went to South America. They killed nearly everybody, quite unintentionally, by taking up a number of diseases simultaneously. But one disease never seems to kill more than a quarter of the population. It's happened with smallpox, with diphtheria, with the Black Death. It happens every time. Well, it's always possible that there'll be a different one, but there's a natural limit because immunity sets in, or people change their habits, or something. It does seem to be a natural biological limit. We have a predictive statement. Even if predictive statements aren't always true, they're all we've got. So we have to use them. An awful lot of medicine, preventive medicine, is based on predictive statements like that, which are the best we've got just now. And we use them. How else? So, now what did I say? Our use of models, where's my little picture that I started with? My use of models, we have a predictive model, and because it is predictive, it can be tested. We have conceptual models which enable us to think. Don't underestimate them, because they will make us think things we would never ever think otherwise. You see, why did Myron Tribus think of the germ theory of management? Because he knew all about heat engines. What's a heat engine got to do with management? Right, but it's a creative concept. And so it goes on. Dr. Deming came into this from a background first in mathematical physics, and then in statistics. It was natural to him to think in statistical models, to think in terms of variation. He looked for things that other people had not looked for. Until you have the concepts, you don't even look, let alone predict. So you have to have them. I don't think we have yet got the fully axiomatized model. I believe we've got to work towards it, because we will then be able to use the power of logic. Now, logic is a very dangerous thing. I know of mathematical theorems which can be proved which aren't true. There is a mathematical theorem which says that if you take a sphere, you can subdivide it in such a way that you can put it together and get another sphere 8 times the volume. That would solve the financial problems of the world if we could do it with a sphere of gold, wouldn't it? Or else it would just reduce the price of gold or something. Now, it's a mathematical theorem. When you talk to a mathematician, you say that's rubbish. He just looks blank. But it follows from the assumptions. Well, as far as I'm concerned, so much the worse for the assumptions. But I can produce other examples of things that are demonstrably true in mathematics and false in the real world. And I can produce other examples of things which are demonstrably false mathematically and yet turn out to be true. They're not many, but there are some. It's the predictive model which is best. The analytic axiomatic model is extremely valuable because it orders our thoughts. And it's the three things working together. Just as in profound knowledge, you lose overwhelmingly if you do not use all four simultaneously. When we come to think about these problems, we must use all our parts of our brain. Our reasoning power, our creative power, and our cynicism. Because science is organized cynicism from one point of view. I told you, you've got to try and disprove everything I say. It's no kindness to me not to do it. That's organized cynicism, isn't it? How else? But at the same time, you've got, if a law is formulated in one way, see, formulation is the step between the model and the prediction. If it turns out to be wrong one way, okay, that's all right. We just formulate it another way and it'll be right. It may change our concept completely, but the facts are still there. I was reading a book recently. It was about goal setting and reward systems by Locke and Latham. I don't know if anybody else has read it. Well, as a matter of fact, when I say I read it, this is a slight exaggeration. I asked my daughter to read it and tell me what was in it. She's a fast reader. But you know, if you do it by somebody else, that's delegation. And she found that's good management, I assure you. If you can't delegate, what? She found a statement which went like this, that there is certain evidence that something happens. The explanation of this is obviously wrong, therefore the facts aren't true. Now, it didn't actually say that, but that's what it amounted to. People cannot distinguish between explanation and evidence because they have not separated these ways of thinking. So maybe, since what we're here to do today is to stimulate you into producing new ideas, but they've got to be good ones. You know, we want the right ideas, but you can only get right ideas by being wrong, by taking the risk of being wrong, by generating creatively and thinking logically and so on, but never trust the logic and never trust the concept. Many people set up, most political arguments are based on saying, no application to anybody in the world, most political arguments are based on a set of assumptions that some people have never questioned, and they deduce logically from them. They're absolutely right. If only the world were like that, they'd be right. But in fact, the world is so complicated that you can never think of all the things that can go wrong in your logical argument. There's a very interesting, now, who is it? Ed Baker mentioned Plato, Descartes, and so on. My favorite is Francis Bacon, because one of the things he said was, the subtlety of nature, nothing can be established by argument alone, because the subtlety of nature is greater by many times than the subtlety of argument. He knew something about a system. Maybe there are one or two simple mechanisms that you can argue logically through. When you come to a system, nothing is true until it is checked. And even then you've got to keep on checking. And even then circumstances may change. Now, why are we bothering? I want to wrap this up fast now so that you have time to throw things at me. I said, we are not trying to prove the Deming philosophy is true. We're trying to understand why it works. Just as you want to understand why you're washing a table. You can do it better. If we can have a theory which enables us to predict correctly and isolate these laws of nature, we will be able to say whether the Deming philosophy will work under all circumstances or under certain circumstances. Say, some parts of it may only work in a transformed organization. But what I've been talking about, the laws of chaos, seem to me to be laws of physics which work under all circumstances. Prove it wrong if you can. That's your job. That's everybody's job. Now, you see, it's very important to know what is culture-bound, what is bound to a particular state or development of society, of technology, and what is likely to remain true for the next few thousand years. The law of gravity may cease being true in a few thousand years, I don't know. But if we know that, we have a tremendous security in making our predictions. That's what science and this philosophy and our conceptual thinking are all about, to know. Well, it's to help us make unexpected connections. I hope I have surprised you with one or two connections I've made today between malaria and the Deming transformation. How about that? A bit. It sounds way out, but it is based on a predictive model. Just as Ross predicted the end of malaria, nobody will believe him, so Dr. Deming has predicted transformation. People don't seem to believe him either. And I believe the reason is that it's one of these multiplicative models that's involved. So that's what we're in business to do. We are to expand our knowledge and our depth of understanding so that we can correctly stretch out beyond the limits without falling flat on our faces. Or if we do, knowing when we've done it, because I'm afraid if you don't have the right system for knowing, you will become totally wrong and not even know it. Because, you see, you keep on going back to your justification, and you say, ah, yes, but I can prove it. Oh dear. No, you can't prove it, you can only test it. Or you can say, but this is so obvious and so understandable, you've got the concept. And maybe you've no concept at all to explain what really happens. Do you know, I don't think anybody in the world understands quantum theory. What a relief. Because I don't, and I wouldn't like to think that somebody else understands it when I don't. I mean, I suppose that's selfish. It still works. It is utterly predictive. It's a pity that that's all we're left with, because we don't know where to generalize. It's all guesswork. But you see, we have a lot to go on, much more than we thought we had. This is a very, very rich field. And that's, I hope, what is going to happen, it's already started. This is something, but unless we organize, unless we know what we're doing, we're going to waste an awful lot of effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I thought it was marvelous. I do have a couple of questions and a comment. To your second law of chaos, you said that removing special causes, reducing chaotic variation
Whoops, just a sec.
Is in all cases benign. It's not on the charts, what you said.
The second law of chaos.
Schuhart's second law.
Yeah.
You said
That
removing
removal of
chaotic
special
variation
causes-
is in all cases benign.
Yes.
There is a counterexample I know about
Excellent.
Cardiac rhythms.
Sorry?
Cardiac rhythms.
Right.
If you take the chaotic variation out of cardiac rhythms, you get tachycardia and death.
Well, that's nice. Thank you. Could you write that down and send it to me?
Huh? Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly.
This is exactly the point I'm making. Every statement has to be qualified. You don't understand a law of nature, you don't understand a law until you know when it doesn't work. That's what almost defines understanding. Now, this is how we go, and this is not an aggressive, I'll get him business. This is cooperation, win-win. Because I don't mind these laws being disproved. That's what they're there for. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good.
I noticed that you didn't define in this special cause and common cause.
No.
It appears from your discussion that they are not intuitively obvious. Can you talk to those points a second?
Yes. If you take, as you can imagine, I was a bit short of time. If you take the Schuhart machine, it becomes easier to define these things in terms of a special cause is something that disturbs the ordinary operation of this, disturbs an information flow, or something like that.
Is that not circular?
Sorry?
Is that definition not circular?
Maybe it is.
You generate the
Let's
Schuhart
work on it.
machine from your laws, and then you define
No.
common cause and special
No.
cause within the machine.
I stated the laws approximately first, which is the normal scientific
Clear.
process. Now we can state them more clearly in terms of this analytic thing, just as Turing stated his computing things more clearly. This is a model to enable us to clarify what the laws mean. Now we can begin to state what a special cause is and what common cause variation is. Common cause variation would require us to make a permanent change in that. A change in the system would make a permanent change in the input variation, or in the process, or the interpretive method, or the store of knowledge. Any of those would change the process. You see, some of those are not obvious until you force yourself to consider all possibilities.
I don't get it, but I'll work
If
on
you
it.
improve your ability to interpret the results, you will reduce variation. You've changed the process, changed the system.
That's clear, but what's a common cause?
The common cause variation is what is left, the irreducible minimum, which this
Okay, what's
is
a special
variability
cause then?
that comes out here when you have done all these things.
What's a special cause then?
A special cause is something that is not a normal way of operating of this machine, but interferes with it temporarily.
It's fairly weak.
Yeah?
What you're saying, I mean, it's like it feels like you're grasping.
So
I, mean,
I feel-
I can see it. I can see what you're trying to say, but it's like you're off on points and planes and stuff.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, all I can say is that Schuhart, you can operationally define it in terms of your control limits, which is correct for one purpose. For another purpose, you want a conceptual definition, and so on. And yes, this is work in progress. Do you know,
Okay.
I've only been on this for 35 years.
That's fine. I'm just
Yeah.
curious if you had one.
First 20 years were demolition work.
Okay. One more. Actually,
Right.
one more and a comment. What is less chaos?
Sorry?
That implies that chaos is measurable by some
Yes.
way. And
I have an operational definition of less chaos. I did hope you'd ask. Do you know, I didn't pay him. I was going to, but I thought it might destroy his intrinsic motivation.
thank you.
Less chaos means fewer common causes, fewer special causes, or, now just a minute, I have to be very careful with this, fewer special causes with common cause variation as defined by control limits, etc. This is purely operational, not increased. Okay? That's fewer special causes with common cause variation not increased, or no more special causes and common cause variation decreased. That's an operational definition of less chaos.
Okay, that's an input definition of an output variable.
Yes.
Right? And what you said in the introduction to your talk was that most chaos is invisible.
Yes.
So that's the genesis of my question. Less chaos. Is there a way to measure it within an organization?
Nope. The most important variables are always unmeasured and unmeasurable. You have
my
to rely on
intuition.
theory to deal with the unmeasurable. You cannot do it any other way.
Okay, that was my intuition. I was wondering
Yeah.
if that's where you were going.
Sorry,
Last point.
that's incomplete, but you can get the rest. You must include the other possibility that no more special causes, no, the same number of special causes and lower common cause variation. Then it's operational.
Okay.
Okay?
Last point. Have
Oh.
you read Dawkins' work on memes? In
No.
like the selfish gene, he's said that memes are very similar to genes, and they're infectious and moving. Selfish gene, 1975.
I don't know it. Please send me the reference. Thank you
Certainly.
very much. Right, sorry, no, we're all right on time. I'm not worried. I don't want any dinner, but I live for this. Some of you may be hungry. We're okay. Thank you. Do carry on, please.
For those of us who are not adept at challenging established scientists and are simply attempting to be students here, which includes me certainly, I just have a question of clarification. Your last statement, as I understood it, was something like that Deming's system of profound knowledge has a good deal of predictive value.
Yes.
And that we came to it through a conceptual model. So
Yeah.
you were talking about we can test it, but I think you said we can't prove it. Testing, proving, Proving
Right.
would be the axiomatic side, is that
That's right.
correct? And then, okay, if we can test the model under the predictive type,
Yes.
and we can prove it under the axiomatic type, what do we do under the conceptual type as the verb?
Oh, the conceptual type is just to enable you to think about it. You can't even think until you have some concepts. If you've got no concept of size, you can't even begin to measure anything. If you haven't a concept of variation, and a lot of people haven't, do you know, isn't it amazing? You would never get anybody building a bridge if they'd got no concept of the law of gravity. They might not know the precise acceleration, etc., but they have some feel that things fall down. There are people trying to manage who have no concept of variation. It's just as if it doesn't exist. Interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nita. Oh,
Yeah.
I quoted you earlier, and I hope I didn't misquote you. I planted you, of course, too.
I'd like to thank you for your discussion this morning. And since the issue of single supplier was brought up earlier, I think that understanding chaos is a really nice way to understand the point that Dr. Deming was trying to make by, he used to say go to a single supplier, and in more recent years he was trying to explain his logic behind that and trying to reduce the chaos that's introduced into the system of production or service is the whole basis for, if not going to a single supplier, then really looking at reducing the number of suppliers and working with them. You
Right.
can imagine if you're making something that has 5 components in it, and you have 10 suppliers per component, and each supply of those 10 suppliers of each component makes the product that he sells you within specifications, still each one will be a teeny bit different, right?
Yeah.
So if you just have one input, you've got 10 teeny differences. And if you have 5 inputs, and maybe if you're manufacturing a car, you have thousands of parts, then you've got, I don't know how many different combinations of all those possibly coming together, but you've got chaos.
Right.
And that's what he was talking about trying to manage. And also you could think of the same issues involved in the design of a product. The more people you have in that process, to a certain point it might be enriching, and after a while you've just got too much chaos coming in. It's more easy to see this in the situation of production. But chaos provides us a really good way, and your discussion does today, and I thank you for it, of understanding that the introduction of the chaos into the system can really cause a lot of problems on the output side, which may be very hard to trace back to their origin. So
Right.
thank you.
Thank you, Nita. I should make a point. I talked about invisible chaos because, remember, the invisible chaos will become visible somewhere. It'll travel burrowing through the organization underground, and then pop its head up in some horribly unexpected place and absolutely clobber everything. Just as the iceberg, the bit of the iceberg that sank the Titanic was the bit underwater. It's worth sort of fixing that one in your mind. It wasn't invisible when it had worked, when it had its effect. Thank you.
Just trying to make a connection between conceptual and axiomatic and predictive to Lewis's idea that a priori knowledge comes in 2 chunks. One is the naming of things, and the other one is logical, which is an internal coherence. And then you have to take those, that is knowledge.
Yes.
And then you have to take that and apply it to the world,
Right.
which would be predictive. So am I making the right connections here? Or
I think so, yes. Most philosophers don't even talk about that bit, just as if it didn't exist. But you see, as a practicing scientist, I know if I didn't speculate, I would get nowhere. It's wild out there, really wild. But when scientists get together, that's what they do. They speculate. Then they go away to their laboratory and they test. They also go away and write complicated mathematical papers in which they tear to pieces all the assumptions behind something and see, does it fit? There are 3 separate activities, each of which is essential in the long run, and like the components of profound knowledge, used together, they are far more powerful than any one together. Most, say, Popper's theory of, sorry to talk all this philosophy, I know not everybody likes the stuff, but there are people in the audience. I see Ed Baker still at the back. He hasn't passed out after what I've said yet, you know. You never know. Popper talks as if it's only that. He doesn't talk about where the stuff comes from. Well, that isn't actually how science works. Thomas Kuhn, rather more on the point when he included all of this. Is that fair, would you say? You're not throwing anything at the moment. Okay. Sorry, but well, we've got the expert in the family. We may as well use the knowledge. But thank you very much. Yes, it's a very important. Oh, Gypsy, you're coming in. Ian?
It seemed to be what you were trying to describe, and that was what Kant called synthetic a priori knowledge, which was, if you like, what we genetically inherit as a capability but requires experience to create structurally. So, like, for example, we have the concept of spatial separation. We need to have the capability of bringing that concept into being in our mind, of creating that concept. That requires experience, but it also requires something that's a priori in nature. And in that sense, it's certain. It's certain, but requires experience.
Probably. I'm sorry, I don't know enough about psychology to say so, but I can just tell you a story of my own which illustrates a bit of it, in that when I was young, I always fell asleep if I read for any length of time, and it turned out, although I had excellent eyesight, I could see, anything, anywhere. Can't now. I'm blind as a bat without my glasses. I can't even find my glasses without my glasses, which is... But it was discovered that my two eyes didn't work together, and therefore I didn't see the world in 3 dimensions. And when I saw those little books where you have one red thing and one green thing, and you look at a book and everything jumped out, I thought they were joking. I didn't know the world was like that. Then eventually somebody produced the right glasses, and I said, oh, you mean it's like that out there? And now my brain knows it's like that and interprets what it sees even without the glasses. It's a very interesting process. So I had the capability there, but I hadn't got the ability. I had the intrinsic capability, not the ability. That seems to be what you're talking about. How this applies to any of these things, I do not know. All I'm saying is, in my experience of doing science, you work these together. And I think that maybe many people specialize in one or another. Maybe I've specialized, I suppose, as a statistician in prediction and testing. It's very interesting to do it properly. I rather like the wild bits too. Logic, well, when I was a mathematician, I used to do that. Now I've got so suspicious of what people do with it. Because if you start off with axioms that are a little bit shaky, it's like shaky foundation of building. You can build your tower and it's going right over there, and it's beautifully logically cohesive, but the thing falls down. Because it started on a very slight way out on the foundations. And it's very hard to predict whether the building of the tower on top of these foundations will actually stabilize the thing or make it get more and more unstable. Nobody, I've asked, nobody I know has discovered how to tell just by looking at the construct whether it's going to do that.
Could we talk again about the operational definition of chaos?
Reduction of chaos.
Reduction of chaos.
If you have fewer special causes with common cause variation not increased, because if you increase the common cause variation by adding in random variation, you can get rid of all the special causes. They'll be smothered. You won't even see them, right? But if your common cause variation isn't reduced, and you reduce the number of special causes, I define that. You can define it any way you like. I claim I'm going to call that less chaos. But equally, it's less chaos if I have the same number of special causes and reduced common cause variation.
What I see there is a concept. I think I understand the concept of removal of some special causes of variation without increasing variation caused by those causes that are common to all outcomes.
Right.
But the control chart as an operational definition of the existence of a special cause of variation was a true operational definition in the sense of this is a procedure which, when applied, provides a definition of whether or not you see, consider there to be a special cause of action. So what is the procedure which corresponds with that definition of reduction of chaos?
supposing I reduce the number of suppliers, I would expect to get less chaos. Now, I might get more under some circumstances. It's a testable thing. If, under some circumstances, having fewer suppliers in a highly unstable situation will put me at risk of huge chaos and huge losses. It's testable in any given circumstance whether I get it. And now that's the way I would test it.
But the question is, what's the test?
Sorry?
But the question is, if it's testable, what's the test? What is the procedure by which you make operational the concept that you described?
Well, I've made operational the less chaos, as I've shown here. Which one are we talking about? Isn't it?
By which you can make a judgment.
I would set up a control chart and discover whether I have more points outside, that's what I mean by it. I'd put it in a form that you could operationalize, I assumed, rather quickly. I didn't want to go into the details, the technical details, but I assume that when I talk about something, I must know that it can be operationalized. I don't always immediately operationalize it, because sometimes you find you need to operationalize it slightly differently. It's actually, if you're not sure, you should check by constructing a particular operationalization to see that it can be done. Then you don't necessarily stick with that one, because it may not be the best one. But everything must be operationalizable, or you cannot test. Is that okay? Well, I haven't answered, this is like attempting to solve, remember that computer that was supposed to solve the problem of life, the universe, and everything? And I've come up with the answer 41.5, which is that's an approximation.